Good day. So in the previous video you have learned how to configure the database. So in this video you're going to learn about how to use it in your Laravel application. So just a recap, to update the database configuration you have to go to the config directory and then database.php file. So the thing that you need is the MySQL configuration. So it's under connections and then MySQL. So this syntax here is the PHP 5.4 syntax for array. So it's the same as doing this. So that's fine if you want to do it like that, but for the shorter syntax it will be like that. So the thing that you need to update is the host database username and password. So the values here on the right are the default ones, so you do not need to touch this. The only thing that you need to update is the .env file. The .env file is the environment configuration, but since it starts with a dot, it cannot be found in here. So what you use instead is the nano text editor. So make sure that you are in the root directory. This is my project, so it should refer to the current workspace. So if you say nano.env, it should have this following configurations. So you've learned all of this in the previous video, but this is just a recap. So the DB host is always localhost, and then the DB database is my project. So this is the name of the database. So if we access our website, we go here in the Apache runtime and scroll all the way to the top and copy this URL, then say phpMyAdmin. So these are the databases. So these are the default ones, and this is the one that we created. So my project is the name of the database. So in our configuration it's okay, and then the username and password that we have selected previously was root and secret, so that's fine. So what this env function is doing is simply loading the different values on this .env file. So if you can see, it's actually the same as what you have in here. So that's it for the recap. So to exit out of this, you just press Ctrl X. So now we go back to our controller and select the data from the testing table. So first let's go to the Laravel documentation site, so you know exactly where to find things. So once here, you can scroll down and go to the getting started link for the database. So scroll down. Okay, so this is the one that we need. So this is actually a controller and it uses the DB class, so we need to copy this and place it here. Now we can select from our table using the select method from the DB class. Okay, but now we have to do some substitution because users doesn't exist in this database, so we use testing instead. Then we do not have any fields to be used for filtering, so we remove the condition. So what this condition does is to substitute the array that you have passed in here. So the second argument for the select method is actually an array. So as I mentioned earlier, that's just a shorter syntax, so it's the same as that one. So if you have more than one fields for filtering, for example, where name is equal to question mark, you should pass the name as the second item for the array, so something like that. But since we do not need it, you can just remove it and remove this as well. Okay, so now we can create an array for the page data. So array and then users. So now in our index view, we need to pass our page data. So we should now be able to access it as the users variable. So we remove this and then we create another for each. So we loop through the users variable, and then each row will be represented as the user variable. So we end it, and then inside we will have a just need to define the unordered list and then put it inside. Okay, so now we can access the different fields. So to access the different fields, you can use the arrow notation. So dash and then the greater than sign followed by the column that you want to output. So you can either use ID or name because we have those fields in this table. So if we try to access, actually let's go first to the routes.php file. So we remove that, and then for the home page, it's going to use the index method in our home controller class. So here's the index method, so we should be fine if we access the home page. Okay, so now it's listing out all the users in our testing table. So aside from this syntax, we can also use the query builder provided by Laravel, so that you don't have to write the SQL query by hand. So to use the query builder, we still call the DB class, but this time we use the table method to select the table that we want. So testing. So now we have selected the testing table, and now we can use the get method to get the data from this table. So now we can assign it to the users variable. So if we refresh, it should output the same. If you want to filter out specific users, you can use the where method. So for example, we want to select only this, so the user with the name of yo. So we say where and then the field where we want to search, so name. And then it should be equal to yo. So now if you refresh, it should only return this. Okay. So when selecting only a single row from the table, it's a good practice to use the first method, so that it will only limit the results by 1. So when using the first method, it should only return the first row, so it's not represented as an array, but instead it's an object. So get method is an array of objects, but the first method only returns the object itself. So now in our view, instead of having a for each loop, we can now delete this and access the different fields in the user directly. So user and then the arrow and then the name of the field. So undefined variable user, because in our home controller we use the users variable, so we should say users. So refresh. Okay, that's it. Next, we try to insert to our table. So to insert, we use the same method, table, and then instead of get, we use insert, and then inside is the array. So this array should contain the different fields, so ID and then the name. But since the structure of our table is auto increment ID, so the ID serves as the primary key, so it should always be unique. So to avoid mistakes from the users setting a same ID, it's auto incrementing instead, so we do not need to specify the ID. So we just say name and then the name that we want to insert. So if we look at the contents, you can see that the ID is actually starts with 1 and then ends with 6. So it just increments by 1 every time a new row is inserted. So when we refresh this page, it should have an ID of 7 and then the name of this Asakura. Okay, so if we browse again, it should add it. So I guess that's it for this video. So all the information that you need when working with databases is under this section. So you can use the query builder to build queries instead of writing the SQL query yourself. But if you need more complex queries, it's safe to use the dbSelect method, which you can use to write the SQL queries.